And today I speak directly to the International Monetary Fund, not with trembling hands, but with a voice rooted in centuries of African pain and now African awakening. For too long, the IMF has posed as a benevolent doctor prescribing economic treatment to sick nations.
They said it couldn't be done. But one West African nation just paid off $4.79 billion, without a single cent from the IMF. At the heart of it all, a young revolutionary leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who defied the West, rejected foreign aid, and rebuilt his country from within. No bailouts, no begging, no compromise. Just raw defiance, radical self-reliance, and a blueprint for Africa's economic liberation. This isn't just rebellion. It's revolution, led by the most beloved figure in Burkina Faso's modern history. Now, let us unveil the untold uprising. And here's the real question. Why are so many African nations still chained to a lie that they can't survive without the West? Traoré didn't just reject that lie. He buried it. His government crushed their debt, stabilized the economy, and sparked a movement, without ever touching IMF money. The message: Africa doesn't need permission, it needs power. When Dr. Apollinaire Kylem de Tambla, Prime Minister of Burkina Faso, declared the clearance of $4.79 billion in internal liabilities, the world paused. No IMF intervention, no World Bank assistance, no grants from Western powers. It was an act of monetary rebellion. A daring proclamation that Burkina Faso was no longer conforming to the conventions of the global financial structure. They didn't buy into the storyline that Africa's struggling nations are fated to lean on external donations and credit. Instead, they turned towards their citizens and local economy. In a territory often characterized by reliance on Western economic aid, Burkina Faso reshaped the narrative. But how did this modest, landlocked republic, often labeled a financial outlier, achieve such a staggering milestone? How did Burkina Faso eliminate close to $5 billion in liabilities, all while maneuvering through a turbulent political and security environment? The solution rests in a sequence of deliberate and strategic initiatives that converted internal debt into a domestic economic anchor. The primary tactic that enabled Burkina Faso to wipe out its debt was a radical change in its financial methodology. Instead of depending on overseas credit or support from Western entities, Burkina Faso looked inward. The administration floated bonds to homegrown financiers, enterprises, banking institutions, and private citizens, who had been increasingly reassured by the nation's leadership and financial outlook. At first glance, it might appear illogical for a nation grappling with fiscal strain, including militant threats, to pursue internal lending. But Burkina Faso's leaders understood that a rising wave of patriotic spirit and solidarity, coupled with a maturing financial ecosystem, created an ideal moment to harness domestic capital. By offering sovereign bonds on the national exchange, Burkina Faso established a direct mechanism for internal investors to help settle the nation's obligations. This approach was grounded in belief. Burkina Faso's administration fostered a climate of assurance in their capability to steer the nation's financial course. As the government emphasized budgetary responsibility and dedication to infrastructure progress, domestic backers became more inclined to finance their homeland. Burkina Faso was no longer reliant on external lenders or multinational institutions, but instead leaned on the monetary resilience of its own people. This initiative helped transform the national perspective from dependency on overseas assistance to confidence in indigenous solutions. The outcomes were extraordinary. Investor trust skyrocketed, and Burkina Faso succeeded in unlocking a previously underestimated internal Aztec domestic capital. By prioritizing this approach, Burkina Faso demonstrated that internal borrowing can serve as a potent instrument for economic independence. That's why discussions like the one we're having today are vital for cultivating a mutual grasp of leadership. The mentality of requiring external oversight must be consigned to history. One of the most remarkable elements of Burkina Faso's debt resolution plan was the administration's capacity to uphold investor assurance. Despite the nation's unstable political and security context, including the menace of terrorism and the persistent strife in the Sahel corridor. The leadership maneuvered through these obstacles adeptly, preserving a sound fiscal atmosphere that enabled continued issuance of bonds and internal fundraising. In a nation where disorder typically compels investors to retreat amid concerns of violence, Burkina Faso forged a different path. The government implemented tangible measures to keep its bond market appealing. The Prime Minister and his administration highlighted openness, prudent economic oversight, and a strong commitment to minimizing public liabilities. They conveyed to financiers that even amidst adversity, Burkina Faso possessed the fortitude and perseverance to endure the turmoil. Quick heads up, like and share this video, and subscribe to our platform for more features on Traore Revolution, Black Sovereignty, and Hidden African Chronicles. Let's press on. Another element that strengthened investor faith was the nation's deliberate utilization of its mineral wealth. With mining acting as a cornerstone of Burkina Faso's economy, the leadership successfully capitalized on profits in the gold sector to secure internal debt. This provided financiers with an extra layer of assurance, recognizing that the state held substantial assets it could access if necessary. In the face of foreign influence, Burkina Faso made a decision that many other African states would hesitate to consider. They assumed command of their fiscal path and conveyed that resilience to the financial community. Instead of yielding to Western stipulations for governmental reform or severe spending cuts, they opted to depend on their internal economic framework, and the strategy paid off. While the state was releasing government bonds, the wider mechanics of the national banking system played a pivotal role in ensuring these securities were purchased and that capital circulated back into the economy. Burkina Faso proactively encouraged the activation of domestic savings, financial institutions, retirement funds, and enterprises were incentivized to channel investments into government securities, which provided both secure and lucrative returns while aiding in the reduction of national debt. The corporate sector also contributed significantly. With enhanced stability and growing confidence in the government's fiscal game plan, indigenous companies began financing infrastructure developments and acquiring national bonds. By collaborating closely with the business community, Burkina Faso was able to direct private investment into initiatives that advanced both corporate interests and the wider economy. This public-private alliance fostered a collective sense of accountability for the nation's financial advancement. At the same time, Burkina Faso's banking industry took deliberate actions to expand and mature the market. Innovative financial instruments, such as bond derivatives, were launched to attract a broader spectrum of stakeholders. This ensured that state-issued bonds within reach for a wide array of purchasers, from prominent financial institutions to modest local businesses. As a consequence, greater funds were funneled into the nation's debt clearance mission, allowing Burkina Faso to maintain momentum in fulfilling its financial duties without dependence on Western backing. Settling a $4.79 billion obligation isn't merely about balancing accounts. It necessitates fostering the groundwork for enduring, stable economic progress. Burkina Faso grasped this. The leadership made well-planned moves to utilize the resources secured from local borrowing, not just to repay outstanding debts, but also to channel them into initiatives aimed at strengthening the country's economic durability. A major emphasis was on infrastructure. The administration targeted vital domains such as transport systems, power generation, and mineral extraction. By reinvesting in the nation's structural and industrial framework, Burkina Faso was constructing the base for future prosperity. This development wasn't solely vital for internal growth. It also enhanced the nation's attractiveness to global investors seeking a dependable and expanding market in West Africa. By dedicating resources to enduring development, Burkina Faso demonstrated that debt repayment is not only about settling old balances. It's about paving the way toward autonomy, free from the grip of foreign creditors. This visionary strategy enabled Burkina Faso to evolve from simply managing crises, realizing prosperity. The national liability wasn't just erased. It ignited fresh pathways for economic revival. Burkina Faso's triumph is more than just a monetary accomplishment. It's a courageous declaration about the continent's trajectory. By eliminating its internal debt through tactical governance and grassroots investment, the country illustrated it doesn't require Western intervention to flourish. This isn't merely a fiscal win. It's a testament to economic sovereignty. Burkina Faso placed its confidence in its citizens, its markets, and its natural assets, rather than turning to global lenders or pleading for foreign assistance. The leadership drew on domestic potential. It harnessed local funds, nurtured investor trust, and channeled capital into forward-looking national initiatives. And by doing so, it established a groundbreaking example for Africa's financial direction. Burkina Faso is defying conventional norms. It has proven to the international community that African nations possess the capability, the wealth, and the determination to break free from external debt reliance. Now here's the pivotal question. If Burkina Faso can achieve this, why aren't other African countries taking the same path? But here's what's on everyone's mind. Did Burkina Faso receive any form of assistance from the West during its critical period? The truth might be startling. Instead of the solidarity typically promised in times of difficulty, the West, fronted by the European Union and its allied powers, chose to abandon Burkina Faso. Instead of extending help or partnership, the West opted to halt all assistance and enforce sanctions in the aftermath of the military takeovers that rocked Burkina Faso in 2022. Major news outlets amplified this position.
The major story here, Niger ECOWAS plans fresh sanctions on Burkina Faso, Mali, UN talks fail.
Imagine this: Burkina Faso, already grappling with domestic unrest, battling militant threats, navigating security emergencies, and striving to recover from political disruption, turned to its presumed Western allies for backing. What it received, however, was not alliance, but retaliation. The European Union, along with other Western nations, froze financial contributions, including vital development allocations. This wasn't merely economic coercion. It was a tactic, crafted to coerce Burkina Faso into compliance, pushing the nation to adopt Western-aligned political and economic policies. The message couldn't have been more directing: if you refuse to conform to our framework, we'll impose the cost. These punitive measures, a part of a wider blueprint to reassert influence, weren't symbolic gestures. They were deliberately engineered to undermine. The West aimed to squeeze Burkina Faso's military governance into relinquishing power and reinstating the civilian administration that had been displaced. Essentially, the objective was straightforward: inflict enough hardship so that the population would reject their new leadership and demand a return to the prior order, one that catered to Western expectations of governance and fiscal strategy. But what unfolded next completely changed the narrative. Burkina Faso didn't disintegrate, it didn't plead, it didn't descend into disorder. Instead, it made a groundbreaking choice to forge its own direction. Led by President Ibrahim Traoré, the administration confronted immense international scrutiny, but stood firm. They didn't offer apologies, and they didn't go cap in hand for assistance. They assumed full responsibility. This wasn't an impulsive act of rebellion. It was a deliberate and strategic decision. Burkina Faso made a determination that many African countries are reluctant to taking. They concluded they could thrive without Western dependency. Rather than appeal to the IMF, the World Bank, or other global lenders, Burkina Faso turned inward, relying on its own citizens, local commerce, and national financial frameworks. And in doing so, they executed a transformative act. Refusing foreign support amid political unrest and security uncertainty is an extraordinary undertaking, especially in a global order where African nations are consistently told they are incapable without outside rescue. But Burkina Faso's leadership took a resolute stance. They would no longer be part of the storyline that depicts Africa as powerless. They recognized the long-standing Western perception of African nations as subordinate dependents. Eternal supplicants unable to function independently. Burkina Faso rejected that portrayal and completely reframed the story. In every historical moment, we observe acts of both integrity and betrayal. But we must avoid simplifying Africa's complexities into shallow stereotypes or sweeping labels. The refusal of Western assistance and resistance to sanctions represented a monumental milestone in Burkina Faso's sovereign journey. Rather than crumbling under global coercion, Burkina Faso opted to pursue a fresh direction, one anchored in autonomy. No more reliance on Western charity. No more waiting for international benefactors to dictate Africa's destiny. Burkina Faso's government shifted to an approach bold in its clarity. They looked inward, to their own citizens. Domestic markets became the foundation of this transformation. The administration mobilized local enterprises, financial institutions, and individual backers to champion its national development vision. This was no careless risk. The leadership realized that genuine progress required more than just new policies. They needed to cultivate belief and assurance within their own borders. That was the true testic, persuading the Burkinab population that they could generate capital locally and rely on themselves. Not international relief. What's even more astonishing, it succeeded. Despite persistent security challenges and Western restrictions, Burkina Faso accomplished what many thought impossible. While the West predicted disorder would devastate the economy and force capitulation, local stakeholders remained resolute, supporting the government's agenda with their own financial contributions. Burkina Faso succeeded in mobilizing substantial internal capital, without appealing to the IMF or chasing Western financiers. They applied these assets to continue building infrastructure, settle outstanding debts, and stabilize the economy, all without pleading for outside intervention. This wasn't mere endurance. It was triumph by their own blueprint. The West had misjudged a crucial foreseig, the strength of African autonomy. Burkina Faso's leadership, under President Ibrahim Traoré, demonstrated that African countries can exercise independent economic judgment, without submitting to the dictates of the World Bank, the IMF, or Western political powers. They dismantled the illusion of reliance. They overturned the belief that Africa is incapable without external assistance. And they proved that Africa is not bound to any overseer. Instead of being cast as feeble or needy, African nations must be acknowledged for what they truly are: competent, inventive, and independent. Burkina Faso has illustrated that with visionary leadership, political bravery, and internal resource activation, any African nation can escape the grip of economic domination. This occasion is more than just a domestic win. It's a declaration to the entire African continent. You don't need consent to prosper. You don't need to plead to persist. And you absolutely don't need the West to flourish. So the question endures: why are so many African states still clutching Western aid as if it's essential for survival? Why do so many African countries continue to reinforce the myth of reliance, waiting for Western nations to hand out assistance? The reality may be hard to hear, but it's undeniable. This pattern serves Western interests far more than it uplifts Africa. For generations, Western powers have engineered a framework that enables them to extract vastages from Africa, all while keeping the continent tethered through debts, conditional support, and corporate plunder. The portrayal of Africa as a fragile, dependent region constantly in need of help isn't a mistake. It's a deliberate plan. Global financial entities and foreign governments have profited enormously from Africa's hardship, whether through interest payments or the staggering revenues of transnational firms. The West continues to siphon Africa's wealth, both openly via resource exploitation and covertly through predatory economic systems. But Burkina Faso has proven that this loop is not inevitable. By opting for internal strength over foreign dependence, they've demonstrated that African nations can take charge of their own destiny. Still, Many countries on the continent continue to cling to the belief that international aid is their only path. Why? The real issue isn't whether it can be done. It's whether others will dare to try. Will other African states emulate Burkina Faso's example? Will they find the resolve to end their reliance on external lifelines and begin constructing economies that prioritize their own populations, rather than external agendas? Burkina Faso's triumph wasn't luck. It was a model. Of course, it's challenging. Yes, it carries risk. But the fact remains Africa possesses the minerals, the knowledge, and the ingenuity to bankroll its own advancement. What's needed is a change in direction, a focus on homegrown answers. By nurturing domestic commerce, harnessing internal funds, and rebuilding trust among local investors, African nations can steadily detach from Western strings. But the biggest barrier isn't monetary. It's mental. Too many African officials remain convinced that Western donations are essential for survival. But Burkina Faso has demolished that notion. Nations with established economies, like Nigeria, South Africa, and others, have the tools to break loose from foreign control and carve out their own independent path. So here's the pressing question: why haven't they? Why do so many African leaders still kneel before Western dictates, requesting aid that only tightens the grip of dependency? The answer lies in plain sight. Look inward. Pour resources into your citizens, your economy, and your assets. Craft a future built on dignity, not desperation. Will Africa keep dancing to the West's rhythm? Or will it finally step into its own? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Is this Africa's time to rise? Will the continent finally reclaim its power? If this message resonates with you, make sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss a new drop. We're here to uncover the stories often buried. The Traore revolution, black identity, and Africa's unwritten legacy. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay empowered.